Live yet? Could you give you an indication when we've gone live? Okay, we're now live. Good afternoon, members, officers, and those of you that have joined us online. Welcome to today's meeting of the West Devon Hub Committee. We will start off in the usual way with apologies for absence. I haven't received any, Mr. White.
Thank you, Leader. We've got an apology for this afternoon from Councillor Crozier, who is joining via the Teams link. Thank you.
Thank you. I fibbed. I was aware of that, so thank you for reminding me. Declarations of interest. Members, in accordance with the Code of Conduct, you're invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests that you may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Does anyone have any declarations of interest they'd like to make? Nothing, Mr. White. We'll move on to item 3, items requiring urgent attention. I've not been advised of anything.
That's correct. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Item 4, confirmation of the minutes. The minutes have previously been circulated. If we can go through them on a page-by-page basis for accuracy. Anything, members, on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4, page 5, page 6. No comments. I'm therefore happy if everybody else is to take those and sign those minutes as a record of the meeting. Thank you, Mr. White. Item 5 is public questions. Again, I haven't been advised of any. Thank you. So if we move on to item 6, which again has been previously circulated, Hub Committee Forward Plan. Does anyone have any comments, observations, or any other discussion they'd like to initiate with regards to the Forward Plan, members? I've got nothing coming forward, in which case I'm happy to accept that as being noted. Item 7 is the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report to month 7 for 2022-23, and I'd like to call on Councillor Edmonds to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. The Revenue Budget Monitoring Report covers the period from April to November 2022. Looking at the budget variations, recycling income is projected to be £240,000 more than the annual budget, with investment income predicted to be £465,000 at the year end against a target of 25. This is due to the increase in Bank of England base rate. However, planning and car parking income are unlikely to achieve the annual budget. The impact of the proposed employer's pay offer for 2022-23 is significantly higher than the current budget provision of £90,000 and will result in additional salary cost of approximately £240,000. The waste contract costs are showing significant increases as a result of inflationary pressures and an increase in the number of properties across the borough over the last two financial years. The net result of all the income and expenditure variations is a projected year-end deficit of £85,000, which is a slight increase on the figure of £70,000 reported at the end of August. Section 7 of the report sets out details of the relevant management actions resulting from the continual monthly budget monitoring at all levels within the Council to ensure early identification of variances. An updated schedule of reserves is attached at Appendix A, and with a projected balance of £6.707 million at March 31st, 2023. And finally, Chair, the report recommends that the Hub Committee resolves to note the forecast income and expenditure variations for 2022-23 financial year and the overall projected deficit of £85,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edmonds. Does anyone have any questions on the subject of this report? As usual, a very clear report. We've got no questions coming forward. So, Councillor Edmonds, if I can ask you to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll move the recommendation, which can be found on page 11 of your agenda papers.
Thank you. Could we have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Mott. Members, any debate on this issue? No debate. I think, obviously, the situation is quite clear, and we've looked at the reports in previous quarters. So we can move to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendation?
8 unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, members. Item 8 is the Capital Programme Monitoring Report to month 7 for 2022-23, and I'd like to ask Councillor Edmonds to again introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. The report provides members with an update of the capital budget as at the 30th of November 2022. The narrative around capital schemes previously included in this report has been moved to the Integrated Performance Management Update report, which is a separate item on today's agenda. The Capital Budget Monitoring Report, which you'll find in Appendix A, and it's an exempt item, and this focuses on capital expenditure against budget. Members will have noted that all capital projects are within the individual capital budgets approved by members in February 2022, and there is currently an underspend against this year's capital budget. A list of Section 106 deposits is shown in Appendix B, totalling £1.488 million, and I can confirm that the two items with an end date of January and July of this year have been spent on ongoing capital projects. All Section 106 deposits are monitored on a regular basis to ensure they are allocated to projects within the agreed timescale. The report recommendation, Chair, is that the Hub Committee resolves to endorse the contents of the report.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Members, any questions? No questions coming forward, so perhaps you could move the recommendation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I move the recommendation on page 25 of your agenda papers. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any debate on this report?
Second.
Oh, I do apologise. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Mott, thank you. Members, any debate on this report? Not got anything coming forward, so we'll move to a vote. All those in favour of the recommendations?
That's 8 unanimous. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Members, we'll move to item 9, which is the draft revenue and capital budget proposals for 2023-24. Members, the papers in front of you represent the latest revenue and capital budget proposals following the confirmation of the financial settlement. Mrs. Buckle and her team have completed the task of bringing settlement figures into the budget, and whilst many of our assumptions have been borne out, there are some variances to previous iterations of the report, which are described and set out in the report at section 1.9. In summary, the report sets out the proposals for the Council to set a balanced budget in 2023-24. Members will also note, and this is a critical point when we discuss some of the recommendations, that forecast budget deficits in the medium-term financial strategy of £234,000 in 2024-25 and £480,000 in 2025-26. The views of the ONS committee have been sought in respect of the recommendations that we are going to be making to Council and resulted in one alteration. There are two other changes to the recommendations that were put in front of ONS, and we'll go through those three differences as we come to them. The recommendations deal with the following items. Firstly, an increase in Band E council tax of £7.37 or 2.99%. Secondly, the financial pressures shown in Appendix A of 1.9 million. Thirdly, net contributions from earmarked reserves of £46,000, including £150,000 from the Business Rates Retention Reserve. The use of £150,000 of New Homes bonus funding, and this is one of the changes that I talked about, one other addition to those recommendations, and that is a proposal to allocate £78,500 of New Homes bonus funding to the Dartmoor National Park Authority to assist that authority in keeping open the Princetown Visitor Centre for the summer, whilst other options are explored. Members will be aware that the New Homes bonus is paid to districts with a strong recommendation that it be passed to national park authorities where appropriate. We have generally done so on application from the National Park Authority, and so this contribution seems like an appropriate use of that sum at this time. The next item is savings of 1.1 million, which I ask you to note, set out in Appendix A. Then the next item is that we are looking for the committee to put forward a recommendation on the increase of the garden waste collection fees as set out in section 5.3, and that follows a recommendation from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The proposed capital programme of £910,000 and the sources of funding of that programme, the levels set out for unearmarked reserves being a minimum of £900,000 as set out in the medium-term financial strategy, but an operating level of a minimum of 1.25 million. And finally, and this is another new addition, that with effect from the 31st of March 2023, the dormant Servico company, which has never traded, is shut down. I'm sure we'll be happy to answer any other questions that members might have about the budget at this stage, and when we get to the debate section, it would be really useful to be able to talk about the recommendation we might like to make with regard to garden waste collection fees. So on that note, members, do members have any questions at this point? No questions.
So, which can I ask a question about the National Park?
I've got a question coming from Councillor Edmonds and then Councillor Pearce from the floor. So, Councillor Edmonds.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation, what is it, number 4, use of New Homes bonus funding to include an allocation of £78,500 to the Dartmoor National Park. Is there a intention or a condition that this should be, put towards a particular project? Can it be ring-fenced, or is that outside of our remit?
Thank you. This recommendation follows discussions that we've had with the National Park Authority with regards to the Princetown Visitor Centre. I wonder if I might bring in Mr. Bates, because Mr. Bates has had those discussions with the Chief Exec of the National Park Authority about his view, but I think it's pretty clear that they're looking to use that money to keep the visitor centre open for the summer. Mr. Bates.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. That's absolutely the case. I think, as is clearly set out in the letter from Kevin Bishop to myself of the 16th of January, which has been circulated to members of the Hub Committee, I think it would be entirely appropriate if Hub is minded to approve the allocation that you make that's conditional on the money being used for that purpose. In other words, to ensure that the visitor centre remains open during the summer and that every effort is made on behalf of Dartmoor National Park to secure an appropriate use for that building going forward, which retains both an visitor information point and indeed an education facility as well. So I think that would be entirely appropriate, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know what other people think, but Mr. White, I'd be very content if, when we get to the recommendations, to recommendation 4 was added with the proviso that the funding is to be used to support the opening or the keeping open of the visitor centre. You're able to come up with a suitable wording. Thank you. Did you have a further question, Councillor Edmonds? Thank you. Councillor Pearce, I think, had a question.
.1, the fees and charges, which takes in car parking income. I'm concerned that we continue to use COVID as a reason for the drop in income, when the fundamental cause is the switch to online shopping, which was beginning to occur long before COVID. And I think we need to make more emphasis on that fact, rather than continually blaming things on COVID. And I wonder why we're continually using COVID as a reason for that income drop, when it's the switch to online shopping and people are not using the local shops like they used to perhaps 10 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. I think you've got a very real point there. We are planning on looking at car parking income, and I suggest we roll that into that review and come back with some proposals in due course. So I think your point is really well made, and we clearly need to do something about it. I think that there are also wider issues there about the use of town centres and whether they become destinations for things other than retail shopping. So all of that, I think, is a complicated question that will roll into a review that will happen very soon. Hopefully you're happy with that, Councillor Pearce.
Yes, Leader, thank you.
Any other questions, members? In which case, I'd like to propose the recommendations that are contained. Just trying to find the right page. On page 33 and 34 of your papers. We'll take them in their entirety with an addition to recommendation 4, which will read, Mr. White.
So, if you're happy to agree, Leader, at the end of part 4, i.e. 3.23, add a comma with the proviso that this funding be used to ensure that the visitor centre at Princetown is kept open during the summer months.
Can we put in the end of September? At least until the end of September?
Can we not just put for as long as possible?
Well, as long as possible might be
so
the
that we're
end
not
of,
putting an end
that
date.
could
so
be
that
the
we're
end of June. Or
Well, I wouldn't expect there to be an end date on it, if I'm honest.
I think commitment is 6 months, isn't it?
I think the commitment is, yes, Councillor Renders may have an interesting view on that.
Voted. Oh, thank you, Chris. When the park actually voted on it, I think they put the date as at the end of September, and I think we were trying to marry the two dates together. I think that's the reason that date was put on it. And yes, obviously we'd want it as long as possible. I think that's the date that they'd given for the first bit.
So I think it makes sense to mirror that at this point. So, yeah, kept open until at least 30th of September 2023, and discussions will be ongoing amongst various stakeholders as to what happens beyond that date. Okay, so if I can move the recommendations en bloc on page 33 and 34, we will, I'm sure, have a debate about the increase in garden waste subscription charges as part of that. So can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Edmonds, thank you. Members, any debate? Okay, if I can deal with the issue then of garden waste charges, which is contained in section 5, I think 5.3. The recommendation from Hub was that the charge should be increased to £49 per annum from April 2023. Members will recollect. On considering the report, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee recommended to the Hub Committee to increase the garden waste subscription charge to £52 per annum from April 2023. and the minutes are presented alongside this report. Does anyone have any views on that? But my recommendation would be that we listen to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. There's clearly going to be considerable support for that at Council, and that we accept their recommendation to increase the charge to £52. Councillor Cheadle.
I think I wasn't able to hear the debate at Overview and Scrutiny this morning, so I'm not quite sure why they've sort of slightly modified the original recommendation on the cost of the service. But discussions that we have had in the past suggest that the green waste charges should reflect the cost of operating the service. We shouldn't be seen to be using green waste collection as a sort of profit generating device, but we should cover our costs. And is that still the situation? Is that why the £52 has been suggested rather than 49?
Well, the original calculation of the £49 was that it should be cost neutral. Councillor Ewings, I think, wants to comment. I don't know whether you want to comment on the discussion that was had at ONS, Councillor Ewings.
Yes, I was just going to answer factually before I go to stray. The reasoning was, Councillor Cheadle, is I had looked at other councils and what they charge, and those figures were put into the ONS papers. We decided that when you're trying to sell the service, it's easier to say £1 a week, which is why the £52 came from where it did. And the question I also had was, we did recommend advertising on the side of our waste vehicles of the service, which isn't shown, and that was carried as an amendment as well to the original figure. And if I can reserve the right to come back in if needed in debate, please.
Thank you. I think apart from that, Councillor Cheadle, the thought was that the £49 would cover the costs as calculated, but we were also mindful of other councils' charges, but also building in a bit of an inflationary gap as well, so that we could make sure that the increased costs of delivering the service are covered at that level. Councillor Mott, do you have a contribution?
No, Councillor Cheadle asked the same question that I was going to ask, was that is that a reflection on the cost? But I would like to add to that question in that, does this also take into account any possible increases that FCC might level against us for increase in their costs?
Yeah, it's exactly that thought, Councillor Mott. Thank you. Councillor Wood, you have a question.
Sorry, I've completely forgotten what the question was. What my question was.
Would you like? Shall I go to Councillor Ratcliffe and then?
Yes, go to Councillor Ratcliffe and come back.
Councillor Ratcliffe.
Thank you, Leader. I have already received an invoice for the lower figure of £49. I received that probably 2 weeks ago and I've paid it. I'm wondering if we're creating a problem in administration if some people have been paying money of reimbursing or whatever. So I throw that one out, that it could possibly create a problem.
Yeah, I'm somewhat puzzled that you've had that invoice. I think we might need to check on that, but the fees would be applicable from the new date, so from the start of the next financial year.
Yes, this was sent. It's one which I've been in discussion with some officers. It was in fact sent to us from South Hams and talked about providing us with a nice brown wheelie bin, but it is there, and certainly I've paid because, and I think the deadline on that was probably 3 or 4 days ago. So I just think that may be creating a problem and ought to be checked before we progress too far.
I suspect, Councillor Ratcliffe, and this was something that you did mention to me and we looked into that you were registered on a mailing list for South Hams as well as a mailing list for West Devon, and you've received a South Hams notification. But let's check that up and make sure that is resolved.
Yes, please do, because I can see it causing a problem. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you very much. Thanks for bearing with me. My question was about, do we sort of have a diarised note to review how many people are taking up this service over the summer? You know, do we get does the next council get a chance to sort of look at that and see what the effect of the price increase has been?
Yeah, I think more than that, Councillor Wood will definitely be reporting back on that and on the uptake, whether we've managed to increase our penetration into that market as well, and what the income and costs of the service overall are. So there will definitely be a report coming back in due course. Councillor Pearce from the floor.
Just by explanation, Leader, if I may, because I'm on the ONS committee, and I think members who were not party to that meeting should be aware that the £49 that was quoted at that meeting was just a break-even. It didn't allow for any further increase in costs in fuel or salaries. And as we all know, the guys who work on the recycling deserve every penny they get, or certainly in my ward anyway. They do a damn good job. The other thing that's important is that the figures that we were given, the other authorities were charging, were prior to any increase that was